Tonight's big stories. After 4 days, Malacanang finally addressed the June 17 run-in at Ayungin Shoal, with Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin saying it's probably a misunderstanding or accident, and no, it is not an armed attack.
For 2 days after that encounter in Ayungin, at least 4 Chinese warships were monitored by the military, some 12 nautical miles off Palawan. We'll be speaking to maritime security expert Ray Powell about this later on. And 3 personnel from the news outlet Manila Bulletin were arrested by the NBI for allegedly hacking websites of the government and banks.
Good evening. Welcome to the show. I'm Regina Lay.
And I'm Shania. Let me just correct what I read in that headline. There was 1 personnel from the Manila Bulletin and 2 others who are not with the Manila Bulletin.
I see.
For a
That's
total
how
of
they're
3
being
suspects.
implicated. Good correction there. 4 days after the most serious encounter between Philippine and Chinese troops at Ayungin Shoal, we finally have official word from Malacanang on the matter.
Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin said that it was probably just a misunderstanding and does not classify as the kind of armed attack that will trigger the Mutual Defense Treaty, or MDT, with the United States.
No. This was probably a misunderstanding or an accident. We are not yet ready to classify this as an armed attack. I don't know kung yung mga nakita namin is mga bolo, axe, nothing beyond that. That's not yet in consideration, no? Because I think this is a matter that can easily be resolved very soon by us, and if China wants to work with us, we can work with China.
The press briefing this afternoon was called without warning late in the day, past 5 p.m. Also answering questions was retired General Andres Centino, who serves as the Presidential Assistant on Maritime Concerns. Centino said they were concerned, which is why the National Maritime Council was convened again today, but said the Mutual Defense Treaty wasn't even considered in the discussions. When asked what President Marcos's demeanor was like when he was first told of the incident, Centino said he was composed.
Well, the president has always been composed, and immediately he asked the concerned cabinet secretaries to discuss the matter with him. And that's also the imprimatur why we had this National Maritime Council convened today.
So the National Maritime Council has made policy recommendations to the president instead, in light of China's growing aggression, one of which is to continue the resupply missions to Ayungin on a regular basis, but this time to pre-announce them.
The Council recognizes a peaceful, stable, and prosperous West Philippine Sea and South China Sea is still a distant reality. As a result of the meeting today, the Council agreed on policy recommendations for the President's consideration. Among these recommendations is the announcement of the rotation and reprovision missions to the BRP Sierra Madre.
Official footage from the AFP showed that on June 17, Chinese Navy ships rammed Philippine vessels. Illegally boarded, that was Chinese Coast Guard ships that rammed a Philippine vessel, boarded a Philippine Navy vessel, and wielded bolos and spears, which they used to puncture one of the Philippines' rubber boats. They also towed away 2 of the Philippine vessels. The close-quarter confrontation resulted in injuries to 7 Filipino servicemen, with another one who had his thumb cut off. The PCG also says that it took them around 12 hours to rescue the injured AFP personnel because of China's blockade and harassment.
Despite of our coordinating efforts to the Chinese Coast Guard to retrieve the injured AFP personnel, we were still subjected to dangerous maneuver and harassment from the Chinese Coast Guard, and not just the Chinese Coast Guard. No, we were also harassed by PLA Navy vessels like the Hubei class missile boats.
China's state media continues to pin the blame on the Philippines. A commentary published by the state-run China media group claimed that with deliberate escalation by the United States, the Philippines has become more and more irrational. Meanwhile, AFP Chief Romeo Browner Jr. spoke with the chief of the Japan Self-Defense Forces by phone, during which the Japanese side said that it stands with the AFP and will deepen its cooperation with the Philippines and like-minded countries. Another party that has spoken up is Vietnam. Its foreign ministry said that Vietnam is willing to talk to the Philippines about seeking measures that are in line with both countries' interests. That's after the Philippines filed a claim with the United Nations last week to extend its continental shelf in the South China Sea.
Just 2 days after that altercation with China at Ayungin, the AFP also confirmed that they have monitored 4 Chinese Navy warships, this time in Balabac Strait off of Palawan. This footage was taken by a civilian in the waters of Balabac on Tuesday. The user who uploaded it to social media said he could tell that these were Chinese ships because they were bearing Chinese flag, the Chinese flag. The AFP confirmed that these were warships that belonged to the People's Liberation Army Navy or the Chinese Navy. The ships were spotted about 12 nautical miles off Palawan.
In a statement, the armed forces said, as part of standard operating procedure, these vessels were challenged and they responded accordingly. The said area is commonly used by international vessels passing through our waters. But up north, 2 Chinese Coast Guard vessels were also monitored via satellite by maritime security expert Ray Powell. He says a 135-meter CCG vessel joined a 100-meter ship in operating west of Batanes between Luzon and Taiwan. And just 1 day after the Ayungin incident, Defense Secretary Gibo Teodoro flew to Ulsan in South Korea to inaugurate a new corvette, the BRP Miguel Malvar. Malvar is the first of 2 units acquired by the Philippines under the Navy's Corvette Acquisition Program.
To talk more about all this, we have Ray Powell back live in the studio tonight. Ray is the director of SeaLight, a maritime transparency initiative of the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation at Stanford University. Hi, Ray. Welcome back.
Reggie, Sean, how are you?
It's been a slow news day, hasn't it?
Aren't they all now?
They sure are. Listen, let's come at it from what's happened today.
Sure.
There was a press briefing called late in the day by the executive secretary, and he has given the first official statement on the matter coming from Malacanang, and he says, and I'm going to quote because I don't want to get it wrong, "This was probably a misunderstanding or an accident. We are not yet ready to classify this as an armed attack. I don't know," and this part is Tagalog, but translated loosely, something like, "I don't know, we only saw bolos in an axe, nothing beyond that." What did you make of that?
Well, something punctured the rubber boats, right? It was something sharp. So now again, what Malacanang decides to classify this is up to Malacanang, and I'm not here to tell them how to do their business. But I mean, there were certainly arms brandished, and there was certainly enough of an attack so that it resulted in punctures to the boats. So but they can, what they choose to classify it as is up to them.
To call it a misunderstanding or an accident, though, does that undermine the situation, or was that just an unfortunate choice of words?
Well,
Or maybe
go
a
ahead.
choice to de-escalate.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I'm sure that there's an impulse to de-escalate, and I understand that. I mean, again, it's easy for me to talk about it as an analyst where I'm not in charge of running a country. But I think it's important to remember when China looks at these situations, they look at them as opportunities to reposition it to their advantage.
Correct.
And we in the West will often look at it as an opportunity to de-escalate. And oftentimes, those two things come together in a very unfortunate way. And I look back to, say, 2012, when we in the West said, and the Philippines, the U.S. said, okay, we need to de-escalate this situation. And China saw the opportunity at Scarborough Shoal and
That's
went
right.
ahead and took advantage of us. So
The impulse to de-escalate from the U.S. side, is that because of a lack of appetite at the moment to trigger the MDT? Do you think could we be possibly talking about a scenario where it's the U.S. side that wasn't ready, and therefore the Philippines had to scale back?
Well, I don't know anything, so I'm not into those conversations. That would be presumptuous of me to speculate on how those decisions were made. I have been advocating for a triggering, if you will, an invocation of Article 3.
I know, you've made the media rounds. You've
I
said it a
have.
few times the last couple of days.
And the reason is because I don't think we need to get hung up on whether or not it was an armed attack. Article 3 essentially says if one of the parties, in this case the Philippines, believes that its security or territorial integrity is threatened by armed attack, it can essentially seek consultations with the United States, which I think would be helpful. I think it would be helpful for the Philippines to know what the United States is considering in terms of support. I think it would be helpful for the United States to know what the Philippines is seeking in terms of support. And I think it would be helpful frankly, for China to know that it's kind of getting into the territory where we're talking about the MDT. Because, I mean, to some degree, where China has come, it looks like they maybe need to understand that they are looking at a very serious situation and not one where, they can continue to push and push and push into the ambiguity and just sort of continue to take advantage of everyone's unwillingness to use concrete terms.
You're absolutely right. I think the common misconception is that once MDT is triggered or invoked, that means immediately America goes to war with the Philippines, right? That's just a general misconception there, which is not the case.
Yeah.
As you pointed out, it triggers the start of consultations.
Under Article 3 in particular, yes.
Yeah, so it will take some time. I mean, just to make it clear to everyone, I think some people think that it's automatic.
Right.
But we are really working very hard here to try to correct that misconception. But let me try to bring it around to your area of expertise. Before this attack, in fact, you were just here a couple weeks ago.
I was.
All of this was not even on the horizon, as far as we knew, right?
Sure.
Were you also surprised at what happened, or were you able to monitor some sort of activity around the Ayungin Shoal, around the BRP Sierra Madre?
I was able to monitor some things. It was harder to see in this case because the ships involved were not as visible for people like me. I think that was probably a choice in some ways on the Philippine side to be a little stealthier, to try to get, to maybe mix up the tactics a little bit, and I completely understand that. I can see how the experience of the last several months would have led people to say, look, we're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's kind of the definition of insanity.
That's right.
Why don't we try something a little different? So I think they tried something a little different.
Except it backfired.
It certainly didn't result in a successful resupply, as far as we can tell. But I mean, sometimes these things don't work out. I mean, I mentioned this morning on a show that I'm old enough to remember 1979 when the U.S. tried to rescue hostages in Iran, and it didn't go well. But we learned a lot from that, and we went ahead and were actually stronger for it. I think in the long run, we had to make some changes and do some reorganization, but I think we ended up in a better place in the end.
This new policy directive to pre-announce all future resupply missions, what message do you think that sends to China?
Well, so it's a different approach, right? Essentially, what we'd be saying, we as the sort of the royal we, or the grand we, what the Philippines would be saying is, okay, look, we're going to tell you exactly what we're going to do. We have a resupply. It's going to happen on this date, and essentially, so that there is no question about what we're doing. Now the question is really, it's going to be up to China whether it wants to decide to let that go through or decide not to let that go through. And if it decides not to, then we will see. We will frankly just see what happens. In some ways, I don't know that it could, go any worse than say the old model of resupply, because they always saw them coming. I mean, Philippine Coast Guard ships broadcast on AIS as they are supposed to, because they are not Navy ships. So they obeyed all the rules. They came in. In the full light of day, as it were, and China responded in many cases very negatively. So if China interprets this and says, okay, we accept this, then I guess it'll be fine. And if they say, we don't want to accept this anymore, then we'll be in a tougher place going forward.
Is it an option, though, to revert to that kind of resupply operation, to have the PCG take the lead for it to be safer?
Well,
And more successful, of course, which is really the goal.
I mean, okay, so why did they try something different? Because the resupplies weren't actually safe, right? They were being water cannoned, people were being injured, boats were being damaged. So again, we understand why they did it that way. By pre-announcing, I think it seems to me what the administration is hoping is that China will accept the fact that by pre-announcing it, they are saying, we are intending to resupply now. Do not overreact, right? And again, if China decides to do that, then I guess we will get to see the resumption of normal resupplies. We haven't seen anything out of China yet that indicates they're ready to do that. So, again, there are things that could be happening behind the scenes that I don't know.
Right, but the Chinese, sorry, Reg, just me squeeze this in. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has repeatedly mentioned that what they want is for the Philippines to inform them, short of saying to ask permission,
Right.
in order to, before conducting these resupply missions, these RORE missions.
Right.
Would it not be perhaps perceived as some sort of capitulation to the Chinese demand?
Exactly.
So that is the danger, right? I think so. What was it about the February model, where we saw the one that went through and was sort of at first declared to be a perfect resupply, and then sort of repudiated later by the administration for not being the way that the Philippines wanted to go forward. And part of the conditions of that were a formal notification to China to say that we're coming. I think this model, from what it sounds like, and is very preliminary, is saying we're just going to announce it to the world. So we're not notifying China. We're just announcing it to the world and saying,
But that's how China's going to see it.
It may be. And again, I keep coming back to this. I think it's important just to remember that what China seeks is justification for its position that it is the jurisdiction at Ayungin Shoal. And it wants to sort of send the message that it gets to decide who gets to resupply and who doesn't, under what conditions, and which ships are involved, and whether it gets to inspect those ships. And, it has tightened that blockade from what we saw before. Now, so part of the reason we saw the scene that we saw...
Can we call it a blockade now?
I do. What you decide to call it is up to you. I call it a blockade because if China is deciding what gets to the outpost and what doesn't get to the outpost, if China is forcibly turning away resupply vessels, to me, I call it a blockade. And one of the reasons I do that is because I think that the world in general, the Philippines specifically, has for many years was not sufficiently outraged at what China was doing at Ayungin Shoal. It really is.
You're saying it's too late?
Well, I think that we woke up late. And there's nowhere else in the world where something like this is going on in peacetime, right? Can you name a single place in the world where one country is blockading another country's outpost in peacetime and nobody's saying anything about it?
Well, they're trying to kick up some noise now, but you're right. By any measure, this wasn't a successful mission. They weren't able to get past China's blockade, as you called it. They weren't even able to deliver the supplies, and they were right there. They were anchored right next to the Sierra Madre. This puts the Philippines clearly in a position of weakness, right? As you come into the negotiating table, what other options are left there?
So this is why I talk about Article 3. This is why I talk about the Philippines' leverage and where can the Philippines find leverage. And so I've been advocating for an appeal or an invocation of Article 3 simply to add to the Philippines' leverage. The Philippines clearly is militarily not as strong as China by a good margin. So, and China, when it looks at the Philippines, is looking at somebody that it can bully around, somebody that can push around. It is not often the case where if you have a schoolyard bully, that you give that bully your lunch money one day and the bully doesn't come back and demand it again the next day, right? So it's unlikely that the Philippines is going to be able to give enough concessions to satisfy the bully. So you have to be able to walk in with something else in your corner that's going to allow you to go in with greater leverage and conduct a successful negotiation where you can actually hope to walk out with your lunch money.
Now, my question is there anything, apart from invoking Article 3 of the 1951 MDT, that is remotely close to that?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question, right? That's what everybody would like to know. Is there another way to go about this, right? And, I mean, there are many elements of national power. It's not only militarily that you have to respond. I mean, so there are diplomatic means, there are economic means, there are informational means, there are other ways that countries exert power, in the international space. But, the Philippines has an MDT for a reason and shouldn't be afraid to talk about it.
Okay.
The leverage, though, that you're talking about, which is the United States, they have to be on the same page.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
The two have to come together and
Yep.
agree, look, it is time to start consultations. This
Yep.
is a serious enough situation. There's a lot that the U.S. is handling at the moment. There's a war in Ukraine. There is the Middle East is caught up in turmoil once again. So the question there is, do you think the Biden administration knows what it needs to do to deter aggressors, right? So alliance building has generally been its answer, and it's embraced Europe. It's drawn closer to Europe, but that hasn't stopped Russia, and that hasn't stopped conflict from the Middle East from breaking out. So the short question is, are they really, is the United States really as big a leverage as you think it is?
Well, I mean, so there's no magic wand, there's no silver bullet. You can't wave the MDT wand and say, make it all go away. The United States has said repeatedly that the Pacific is its priority theater and that China is its pacing threat. And so, and some of the things that you've seen in the discussion about, in the internal debate in the United States about whether or not it should, extend support to Ukraine or these kinds of things, some of those things come up against the question of, does the United States have enough capacity to be everywhere in the world? But the thing that tends to unite Americans across the partisan divide is China really is a serious threat, and we need to be serious about dealing with China. So I think, and by the way, the Philippines has done a lot of work through its transparency to arresting the attention of Americans. And so this is a good time to have this discussion.
You don't think that might change if Biden doesn't win in November?
I
mean, in Trump 1.0, we saw that he was more insular, right? He was more focused on domestic issues rather than international affairs.
But in Trump 1.0, we also saw probably a significant realignment of U.S. thinking on China, and, kind of coming out of our long delusion about that China would somehow come over to our side with just a little more capitalism, just a little more coaxing. And we saw the rewriting of our national security documents to say, hey, we are actually in a competition with China. So, I mean, I think that it's not as simple as saying, I think we're probably going to continue to hear, say, if there is a second President Trump, there will certainly be a concern about other countries sort of paying for their own defense and those kinds of things. And maybe, the rhetoric won't be as encouraging on certain things. But I think the seriousness about China, I think will actually remain. And I think actually we've seen a great continuity on that topic from the Trump to the Biden administration.
All right. A lot of pundits are also raising the similarity of this incident to the Galway incident, the Galway skirmishes at the Himalayan border that is disputed between by India and China. What lessons can we take, and what important things from that conflict can we take away? I mean, considering that India, they manufacture their own missiles, they manufacture their own arms, and we don't do any of that. Our defense capacity is much, much less.
Sure. Well, so I think there is the parallel is obviously sort of the brandishing of what would almost seem to be primitive weapons, so that you don't end up drawing a gun and shooting at someone, and somehow that keeping things below that level of what we tend to talk about as armed conflict. So it's hard to escape the analogy,
It's all very
right?
gray.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's in such a gray spot.
Gray area.
We don't even know if it's still gray or it's inching more towards the is there a black zone?
The black and white, yeah.
Yeah.
So, no, I mean, the thing about when we talk about China as being a gray zone operator, China thrives in the opacity, in the sort of grayness, because it feels like it can keep pushing because everyone is waiting for to bring in another color, the red line,
Yes,
right?
correct.
And the problem with talking about red lines is the gray zone operator says, oh great, I have the ability to push all the way up until I hit that red line, and maybe even a little fuzziness around the edges of the red line. So, I mean, I think what you see at the China-India border is, both sides are sort of trying to stay away from drawing a weapon, so, but they're still using weapons. So, maybe to some extent that's what we saw at Ayungin Shoal on Monday. Both sides, of course, don't want to go into open conflict. And I think that is actually a little bit encouraging, right? In the end, China actually doesn't want a war. The Philippines doesn't want a war. The United States doesn't want a war. And in the end, countries that don't want to go to war generally don't go to war.
I'm going to go to bed thinking about that statement of yours, eh?
Okay, well, good.
No, but again, the
Hopefully you
point
sleep soundly.
the point is that it's not binary. It's not war or nothing.
Right.
It's not a zero-sum game. There
Yep.
has to be shades of gray beneath that, right? So, what are those options?
Well, so again, what's important is to start with the understanding that because China doesn't want to go to war, but it does want to win, it's going to continue to try to push as far as it can in that gray zone to get as much as it can without going to war. So now what it will do is it will sound like the Philippines is risking war because it wants to win. You've seen this in Taiwan, right? China doesn't want to invade Taiwan. That would be a catastrophic event. Hundreds of thousands of people could die, right? So it doesn't want that. What it wants is for Taiwan to capitulate. And so it wants to do everything it can to convince Taiwan that its best move to get peace and stability is just sort of to hand over the keys to Beijing. It is doing something similar in the West Philippine Sea.
Do you believe that at the core of it, Beijing believes that if it applies enough pressure on the Philippines, that the Philippines will capitulate?
I think that's exactly what Beijing believes.
Okay, I wanted to talk to you again, bringing it back to the whole transparency thing that was our tactic before. We did discuss the last time, and you said transparency is a tactic and
Yes.
not a strategy.
I did say that.
I think we have to dig deeper into that now. We do see the tactic. I think everyone has seen it. We've seen the results of that, as you just mentioned earlier. The whole world knows right now. But is there a broader strategy that you are seeing that some people might not be seeing?
So, the Philippines has reworked its strategy, its national defense strategy, to emphasize territorial defense over counterterrorism, right? So that has been a change in strategy. How it's going to deal as a national matter with China in the West Philippine Sea, I think frankly, I still think they're working through that, which to some degree is understandable, right? This is still kind of a new emphasis. So there's still work to be done on deciding on a strategy. We saw General Santino here. He's still pretty new in his job, working on a maritime strategy. But we are seeing things that are happening as part of a broader strategy, an emphasis on, for example, fully funding maritime security, new Coast Guard vessels, those kinds of things. So I think that the strategies tend to come together. It's not like a bunch of smart people sit in a corner and write the strategy and then everybody sort of comes. Oftentimes they come together by activity, and so I think we're starting to see a building resilience in the Philippines around territorial defense. How that is enunciated as a strategy, I think remains to be seen.
I think we need to ask Ray one quick question, because we did promise our viewers that we would ask it. The 2 ships up there by Batanes,
Yep.
and then the 4 ships
No,
at the AFP.
before you answer that,
Okay.
let me close out the transparency question, because yes, I'm glad you brought it up. We left that theme on a cliffhanger last time, and I did promise you a bit of a debate on it. this June 17 incident, can we now take it as proof that the transparency initiative or tactic or assertive transparency campaign does not work?
No, because again, I have never said, and I don't think people have said, those people who have studied this matter, I don't think have ever said that transparency by itself will achieve a victory in the West Philippine Sea, right? The reason I emphasize it as a tactic and not a strategy is that, there are lots of tactics in warfare, for example. Conducting an airborne assault works to do many things, but it doesn't mean that you're going to win the war with it, right? There are lots of things that you do as tactics that are appropriate in many situations, but not all. That they don't win a campaign all by themselves. So again, the things that it does: build national resilience, yes. Build international support, yes. Impose reputational costs upon your adversary, yes. It has done all those things. It doesn't mean that together all those things are going to win the campaign.
Points 2 and 3, reputational damage on your adversary and international support. To what end, though? So again, in this instance, you see that, okay, so we have a strong statement from the G7. You've got statements from allied countries like Japan and Australia.
Yeah, you have commitments of Coast Guard vessels from Japan. You have coastal radars from Japan.
The very crude question there is, if it comes down to that, will they fight with us?
Well, so those nations are not themselves committed by treaty to fight with the Philippines, right? So, that's a separate question for a separate day. But the commitment of resources to help the Philippines build up its military, to build up its Coast Guard, to build up its maritime defenses is real and will have real benefits down the road. Now, it doesn't happen immediately. You can't build a ship in an afternoon, but it will be actual. You will actually be able to look at it and say, this is an actual benefit.
Right. So it's the support for the assets, for the resources.
Right.
And then coming back to Sean's question about the warships.
2 ships in Batanes. I think we're pretty clear on the 4. What happened with the 4, the AFP's pretty much closed the loop on that. They said they're just sailing by normally, an innocent passage. What about the 2 ships in Batanes, rather long ships too, 100-meter and 135? Yeah,
so I'm not used to seeing them up there. The fact that they went up there was interesting to me. And the last I saw, they were sort of moving down toward the southwest in the general direction of Scarborough Shoal. I've seen actually quite a bit of China Coast Guard activity throughout the West Philippine Sea in the last 48 hours or so. So my best guess is that China is sending messages, letting the Philippines know that it is powerful and that it sort of demands attention.
Posturing.
Yeah.
Sending strong message.
Flexing.
Pushing the envelope bit by bit to see how far they could take it.
And I think flexing is a good word for it.
In today's social media parlance, they're flexing.
Okay, we shall have to leave that there for tonight. We've clearly run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us once again, Maritime Security Expert Ray Powell.
Thanks.
Pausing for a really quick break. Right after that, the NBI is now investigating the alleged involvement of the Manila Bulletin's tech editor in the hacking of several government websites. More on that when we return. Keep it here. Welcome back. You're still watching The Big Story here on One News. The NBI Cybercrime Division has arrested 3 individuals for allegedly hacking private and government websites. One of those arrested is supposedly connected to the media outlet, the Manila Bulletin, but the paper has assured their, quote, utmost fidelity to the law. Elaine Fulgencio with that big story.
These men were caught off guard when they were surrounded by agents of the NBI Cybercrime Division during a cyber hot pursuit operation at a hotel in Manila last Wednesday. Among those arrested were a graduating student, a cybersecurity researcher from a company in Taguig, and a data officer from the Manila Bulletin. According to the NBI, the 3 were involved in numerous hacking incidents targeting various government agencies, the military, banks, and several private companies. The NBI has been monitoring the suspects since 2016. They were former members of global security hackers and transferred to the local hacking group Pinoy Luzek in 2019.
Base sa kanilang statement, yung ating Armed Forces of the Philippines, yung Philippine Army na-exploit daw nila, allegedly, yung Philippine Navy nakasama, even the National Security Council.
In addition to hacking for profit, one of the hackers known as alias Kangkong also described his work at the Manila Bulletin. He said he entered as a security data officer at the newspaper after being recruited by the well-known tech editor Art Samaniego, senior technology officer of the Manila Bulletin Publishing Corporation. He said they have known each other for a long time.
Yes, that would be Mr. Art Samaniego. Actually, nakilala ko si Sir Art during my LOLSEC, Pinoy LOLSEC days. So, I will send him details of my exploit, kung paano ko ginawa yung exploit, show him what we call the POC or proof of concept para mapatunayan ako mismo yung nag-hack and may hacking na nangyari.
According to the NBI investigation, it appears that Samaniego allegedly recruited the suspect to hack websites that would be used for his articles. Among the hack sites by alias Kangkong was the One Sambayan app.
One Sambayan, yung coalition po, meron po silang mobile app. Nag-ask siya sa akin kung pwede ko i-check. Check means look for vulnerability, yung application.
Bawat incident o cyber incident, itong editor na to, siya yung naunang mag-post ng article about the hacking incident. Lagi siya, nakita namin yung pattern doon. At according din sa ating hacker, nung hinak nila yung Armed Forces of the Philippines and National Security Council, that was the directive ng editor na yon.
News 5 attempted to get a statement from Samaniego regarding the matter. He denied the allegations. The Manila Bulletin also insisted that they and their employees follow the law. However, the NBI is determined to summon the tech editor for investigation.
Through subpoena po muna, signed by our director, para mabigyan natin ng chance yung kanyang side naman kung ano yung masasabi niya sa mga allegations na to. From there, magpo-proceed kami sa filing ng kaso. It's a direct filing process next.
Authorities admitted that the 3 hackers they caught are very skilled. They managed to access even some military agencies and banks. They also had plans to sell the data they obtained on the dark web. The AFP, meanwhile, is also ready to help with the investigation. They are prepared to provide intelligence and other advanced technological measures to combat hackers. Reporting for News 5, Elaine Fulgencio, we are One News.
A human trafficking case has been filed against Bamban Mayor Alice Guo and 3 others over their alleged ties to illegal pogos. Camille Samote has the details.
Carrying 2 boxes of documents, officials of the PNP-CIDG and the Presidential Anti-Organized Crime Commission, or PAOC, headed to Justice Department earlier today. The agencies formally filed charges of qualified trafficking in persons against Banban Tarlac Mayor Alice Guo. In the complaint, the mayor was also referred to as Guo Wangping, the suspended mayor's alleged true identity. The charge filed against Guo is non-bailable. The case is related to allegations that Guo is connected to the Pogo Hub in Banban that was raided back in March. Authorities found that 10-hectare compound was used for illegal activities, including crypto and love scams. Justice Undersecretary Nicolas T., who also leads the Interagency Council Against Trafficking or IACAT, said there's enough evidence to prove that Guo is involved in human trafficking.
Lumabas na mga ebidensya dito tulad ng kanyang fact na siya ang nag-apply doon sa dating Pogo, doon sa dating Nolo, no, sa Nolo from the local government. Lumabas din ang kanyang involvement doon sa lessor company. At kasama na din yung mga ibang ebidensya diyan tulad ng mga pangalan niya na lumulutang sa mga sabi-sabi mga dokumento na nahanap na sa Pogo compound.
Aside from Go, 13 other individuals are also facing a complaint of qualified trafficking in persons. They are officials and incorporators in the companies behind the illegal Pogo operations, Hongsheng and Zunyuan Technology. Among them is Dennis Cunanan, a PDAF convict who is now a representative of Zunyuan. Also facing charges are Wang Ziyang, a fugitive from China and the alleged business partner of Go, as well as Zhang Ruijin and Bao Yenglin, who were involved in a money laundering case in Singapore.
We discovered that the Zunyuan operation actually started with one corporation, which is Baofu, and then another corporation was created. And all these three corporations, we believe that they are part of the grand conspiracy to commit labor trafficking.
The DOJ meanwhile proposes that an immigration lookout bulletin also be filed against Go, noting that she has the capacity to leave the country. As a government official, Go is also not allowed to leave the country without a travel authority.
Dito naman kay Mayor Guo, hopefully, no, hindi naman siya lilipad dahil siya mismo at yung kanyang mga representatives nagsasabi na nais siyang harapin ang mga alegasyon laban sa kanya.
Go has reportedly denied any involvement with Pogos. Her camp also denied that she is Go Wangping. Go's camp says they will answer the allegations once they receive their copy of the complaint. They also call on the public to stop participating in trial by publicity and to allow them to face the case in court to ensure due process.
Ang hirap kasi kalaban yung internet justice eh. Wala naman siyang balak. Saan naman siya pupunta? Ilang buwan na ba yan? Wala nga attempt na umalis eh.
The DILG has earlier filed graft charges against Go, reason for her getting suspended for 6 months by the Ombudsman. The Senate, for its part, continues its hearings on Go's identity and her involvement in illegal Pogos. In a statement, Senator Risa Hontiveros, who leads the Senate probe, said that the cases filed showed the inherent value of our Senate inquiries and of the close cooperation between the executive and the legislative that enable us to ferret out the truth. Hontiveros adds, sana magpakatotoo na si Mayor Alice Go, tigilan niya na ang pagmaang-maangan at pagsisinungaling. Inaasahan ko pa rin ang kanyang pagdalo sa susunod na hearing. Meanwhile, the PAOK also confirmed that 4 LGUs have reached out to them to seek help in investigating suspected illegal Pogo operations in their respective jurisdictions. For News 5, Camille Samonte, We Are One News.
We have to pause for a very quick break now, but after that, we'll be back with more stories. Keep it here in One News. Welcome back. You are still on the big story here in One News.
All right, some good news for motorists. Passing through the Cavitex, expect toll-free days very soon. President Marcos ordered the Toll Regulatory Board, or TRB, to immediately suspend toll fees for all vehicles passing Cavitex in Taguig, Parañaque, Las Piñas, Bacoor, and Kawit for a period of 30 days. The president led the groundbreaking of the Cavitex-Calax link and the Cavitex C5 link segment 3B, as well as the inauguration of the Cavitex C5 link Sucat interchange segment 2. President Marcos said 23,000 vehicles will benefit from these projects daily, while the suspension of toll fees will help motorists amid rising fuel costs.
We welcome this call and thank the PRA for its initiative to help mitigate the impact of rising fuel costs to our motorists. I now count on our toll regulatory board to ensure the immediate implementation for the benefit of the riding and the transport public.
We all know that an extensive public road systems offer enormous economic benefits and convenience to our people, decongesting traffic volume, reducing travel time, and spreading the population density out of our cities. Not to mention happier citizens if traffic were indeed reduced.
I know that there were also reporters waiting to ambush President Marcos at that event.
I can
Hoping
imagine.
he will answer the question over the Ayungin Shoal incident, but unfortunately he wasn't able to speak to them. Speaking of the president, he has issued a formal order to lower tariffs on rice. Executive Order number 62 brings down rice tariffs to 15% from 35% previously. The NEDA had said before that the tariff cuts goal is to lower the price of rice in the market. Based on their estimates, rice prices could potentially decrease to as low as 29 pesos a kilo. However, some farmers groups oppose the move, fearing that imported rice might flood the country. In response, the Agriculture Department vowed to provide assistance to farmers.
Magkakaroon ng mga dagdag na inputs, ayuda para dun sa inputs ng ating farmers. In terms of fertilizers, tuloy-tuloy pamamahagi natin ng bini, yung libreng irigasyon, yung ating mga makinarya. And then, of course, maganda yung ginagawa ng NFA ngayon sa pamimili, record yung 3.3 million bags na nabili nitong huling dry season.
All right, it's just less than 1 month to go actually a little bit more than a month to go before the Olympic Games in Paris for this year, 2024. And several of our Filipino athletes are set to fly off to France in preparation for the Games. Now, with this in mind, President Bongbong Marcos led the send-off at the Marble Hall of the Ayuntamiento de Manila in Intramuros. That send-off started with a Holy Mass, and in attendance was the Golden Boy himself, Carlos Yulo, along with Philippine boxers Ira Villegas, Nesty Petesio, Hergy Bacyadan, and Carlo Paalam. Also complete and present were Olympic weightlifters Elrin Ando, Vanessa Sarno, and John Ceniza. The players, along with their coaches and team staff, are all flying together to Metz, France, where they will train together at the first ever pre-Olympic training facility. According to Philippine Olympic Committee Chief Bambol Tolentino, EJ Obiena and Yumir Marshall will be joining them in Metz on June 29. This is the largest Philippine contingent to ever compete in Olympic history, but the Philippine Sports Commission is expecting more athletes to qualify.
Sobrang po yun, nakakatuwa po yun, malaking tulong po yun na alam namin na buo kami. Minsan lang mangyari po ito eh. Baga hindi talaga nangyayari ito na maging buo talaga. Sobrang bihira lang mangyari talaga to. So, sobrang nakakatuwang isipin na nagkaisa po talaga.
Well, the deadline is till June 30, so we're still waiting. Yes, track and field, and there's also swimming, and then I think golf still has a chance.
Speaking of EJ Obiena.
Yeah, I was just saying, gold in Poland.
Yeah, that's really good. With just 5 weeks before the opening of the Olympics.
He's got a bit of momentum, and I heard it was a personal best, 5.97 meters.
Also because he's coming off a 7th place finish, which he
That's
might
right.
not be used to, and
Yeah.
we are
Maybe
not
that was
used
just a
to.
blip. Hopefully that was just a blip,
I think
right?
it's just a
Hopefully
blip.
this is he's got good momentum going into Paris Olympics, because we know he is aiming for a podium finish.
And he is world number 2.
Yes.
All right, on that good note, that's it for the big story tonight, and for the week, we are One News, all sides, all the
Reminds
time.
me that yesterday I said have a great weekend. I thought yesterday was Friday. No, today is Friday. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I got
it's Friday.
confused. It's been a long week. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great night and a great weekend.